Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to Sunnah Discourse. Today, this is your host, Mort, and we are back with another interview. And today, it's going to be a very special interview with a brother named Akbar Khoja. And he is an ex-Ismaili, and we are going to be having a discussion about Ismailism again, which will be a continuation of some of the work that we've been doing previously. We've released some other videos in the past regarding this, and so we wanted to continue along on that path so we can bring some clarity and we can shed some light into this mysterious world that most of the Sunnis do not know of and are completely unaware of. But before we get into the interview, just some housekeeping here. Please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Check out the previous videos we've done, along with the newer videos we have released, as well as consider donating. It would be better if you go to the GoFundMe, which is actually down in the ticker down below here. You can go to the GoFundMe and the links will be in the description. So you can help the effort. We have a team here that dedicates hours to doing the research and the editing, and we have costs associated with the websites and equipment and things of that nature. So please be generous, inshallah, if you found any benefit. If you can't, then please encourage others to also donate if you can't. And lastly, please make sure to smash the like button because it helps the algorithms. So if you can't donate, at the very least, just at least smash the like button. That way people will be able to see the video, and inshallah you will get the reward for helping others see the video. So with all the boring housekeeping out of the way, I want to move on to the interview, and with that, I'm going to bring in our brother Akbar. Let me just bring him into the stream. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Akbar, welcome to Sunnah Discourse.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Brother Mort, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure and our honor. I know we kind of scheduled this a few weeks ago, and sorry it took me a while to get in, but I'm glad we had the opportunity today. So we'll just jump right into it. At this time, I think people would probably just want to know a little bit of who you are in the beginning. I believe that early on, I think you were born into an Ismaili family. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I'll just take a step back and tell you who am I and what do I do and where do I come from. Born in a typical Smiley family. Raised up as a Smiley, a very staunch Smiley. I used to actually teach in the Ismaili institutions, which are the RECs, the religious education centers, which they have also called night schools. From there, I made my journey to Islam after studying for about 12 years there, which is equivalent to a high school, right, in school terms. Um, I'll I'll give you more details on that, but essentially, just to tell everybody what do I do is that I would say for the past 8 or 10 years, what I've been doing is I've been actively speaking about Ismailism. The purpose is obviously not to insult or not to speak bad about anybody, but it's essentially to tell the Muslim world about what is Ismailism and also to tell the Ismailis about what the real Islam is. So I believe that once anybody comes to know of any Ismaili comes to know about how distant Ismailism is from Islam, they would automatically, gravitate towards Islam because Islam is so beautiful and it's for everybody, whereas Ismailism is for a select few people, and that's how it's marketed. I've been doing this through a few, I would say, outlets. First is I made a website called rethinkingismailism.com. The rethinkingsmailism.com website has about 100 articles or more most of them by myself and others by, fellow contributors from the ex-Ismaili community. um, Very well written articles, and we also have had refutations to our articles written from the Ismaili side on the, for example, the Ismaili Gnosis website, and as a result, we've written a response as well or updated the articles. So essentially, a lot of claims which with the new Platonic claim which Ismailis make or the scholars make. I mean, the lay Ismaili is usually unaware of such claims. You would find rebuttals on them on our website. The other outlet is the YouTube channel, Rethinking Smallism, your YouTube channel, where we do weekly podcasts or interviews on different topics which should interest Ismailis on, what's the imama versus khilafa, imama in the Quran, what are the qualities of an imam, you know, stuff which essentially provokes the thought of a normal Ismaili, and makes them think about what similarities or dissimilarities does Ismailism have with Islam. So that's what do I have a few other outlets on Twitter and so forth, but I think the main work focuses on primarily on YouTube, and then the website, and then some on Facebook. So that's what I do. You would if you want, I can dwell more upon my childhood and what made me come towards Ismailism, but I'll let you drive the ship.
Yeah, no, I think that would be a good place to start because you know a lot of people don't know what it's like growing up to as an Ismaili, right? I would assume that a majority of Ismailis tend to blend in their communities of the same ethnic background. So people just see them as neighbors and people maybe not without too much information. So perhaps maybe it'd be a good place to start, where you kind of talk about your upbringing, what it was like growing up as an Agakhani, and then maybe I'm not sure if your community was mixed with Sunnis, and maybe talk about how your interaction that were was, and that would be very interesting, I think, for some of the listeners.
Absolutely, I would love to talk about that. So, a typical Ismaili is brought up in a very, very closed, I would say, space socially, because you are strongly discouraged to have Muslim friends. So your friends are, um, you know, your parents and your siblings, they all encourage that you have only Ismaili friends, right? And any non-Ismaili friends or Muslim friends are frowned upon, including the Shia side of things. So they don't really encourage any other friendships. The result is that um, as Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, that a person follows the ways or the religion of his friends, right? So they don't want you to be exposed to that side of Islam, right? um, so very, very close space socially, as I said. We used to follow a strict regimen, more for making sure that I go to the religious education school, religious education center, that is REC, every evening. So it happens 5 days a week, just like a normal school. So a normal day in my life used to be, go to school, come back, do my studies, and when it's around 6 o'clock or 6, 7, whatever the time for prayer was, we would pack up and go to. The parents would go to Jamaat Khana, and within the Jamaat Khana premises, there would be a religious education center, REC, or night school, as I used to call it, and it would run the same on the same pattern as a normal public school. So it would have grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then grade 11 and 12 used to be HRE, which is a higher religious education, and grade 13 and 14 used to be ARE, which was advanced religious education. Essentially, you were eligible to become a teacher once you've passed your HRE, and that's the path I took. So I did my night school. I did all my Ismaili studies. I did. passed my HRE and became a teacher. I taught for a while, but at the same time, I was looking into a lot of um, other religions, I would say, including Islam, right, and other branches of Islam, and I finally made my decision to leave Ismailism. But yeah,
Yeah. So, a quick question: would you say your family were religious in nature, or more like just part of the community? Because I think there's two different things, right? Like
yeah,
there's actually being religious, and there's actually being, and then there's close ties to a community. So I'm assuming since you went to night school or whatever they call it, I mean, were your parents actually practicing Ismailis that believe in the whole rituals and everything?
yeah, I would say pretty strong followers, very, very, staunch followers of Ismailism because my parents would get up at 3 in the morning every day and go to Jamaat Khana, right? So that takes quite a bit of dedication, right? Even most practicing Muslims would find it difficult to get up and pray Tahajjud, where Ismailis, staunch Ismailis, would get up at that time and go to Jamaat Khana, and they would really say it with pride that we are the only community who does that and so forth. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, my parents were extremely religious, but going to the REC or the night school or the British Education Center, it's not something which only a very religious or strict smiley would follow, right? Or make his or her children follow. Going to the REC is something which is taken as a default. I mean, you can't be a smiley kid and not be in the REC. If somebody were to, for example, I told you that we would go to the Jamaat Khana, so parents would go to the Jamaat Khana, the main building. We would go to the smaller building in the same compound, which is the night school. If anybody would see a kid with his parent in the main Jamaat Khana, they would have a very polite conversation usually, and they would strongly recommend to have the child enrolled in the REC. And parents also are okay with that because it's kind of a babysitting service for them as well, for the early years.
Mm, okay.
But it's by default. So all Ismailis would go through that brainwashing cycle, which takes place in the REC, and they would teach you concepts about, for example, how does the Quran refer to imama, right? And they would take several verses out of context and teach and quote them. The other thing which they would teach is Ismaili history, a lot of which is, kind of lopsided, one-sided, kind of made up, many parts missing in the Ismaili history as well, as you know. Um, the other thing they would teach are the ginans. Now, ginans are the hymns which Ismailis sing, pretty close to how Hindus sing their bhajans, right? So that is something which they would teach in the RECs, religious education centers. A lot of these ginans or bhajans, or I mean, they aren't called bhajans in the Smiley circles. They are called ginans. A lot of these ginans have very, very questionable statements in them. Ginans such as, Moment Chetamani and, you know, for example, I was just telling you backstage about, for example, the five pillars, right? Uh, the Pir Imam Shah who writes the Ginan, he would say that as a mu'min, you would need to follow the five pillars, and he quotes the five pillars as um, don't speak foul from your mouth, don't hurt anybody with your hands, don't see any evil with your eyes, don't hear any evil with your ears, and so forth, right? I mean, it would be completely contrasting to what Islam is, right? Another Ginan would, for example, say, or kind of go on to prove is that there are avatars, and Ali radiallahu anhu wa alayhi salam is the 10th avatar of the Hindu Lord Vishnu, right? So these, very, very strange, even though Ismailism does come from initially comes from a Neoplatonic philosophy, from if you read the works of Abu Yaqub Sijistani and so forth. But over the years, there has been a lot of Hindu influence on especially the Ismaili communities which live within the lower, or say southern parts of Pakistan and India, right? Like Gujarat and Bombay and so forth. There were a lot of Hindu influence because a lot of converts were Hindu and they converted to Ismailism, or there are several versions on this because there is something called Satpanthi as well, which is kind of a crisscross between Islam and Hinduism, and a lot of detail on that. But essentially, as I was saying in the night school, these are the core subjects which we used to read. So in that course, one statement which constantly popped up in my mind was that why do we make sujood to the Aga Khan, right? And I was always that was always a question I had in my mind. That question was never answered, and as a result of that, I was constantly searching for answers, right? Um, a lot of time passed, and I read up on all the religions and other branches of Islam, and other strands and other schools of thoughts and so forth. But I perfectly remember one of my friends told me that, you know Akbar, why do we make sujood to the Imam, whereas in the school, in the normal public school, right, we study that we should only make sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And that stuck in my mind. That was a constant thorn in my otherwise brainwashed smiley mind, right? That why do we
So,
do
so
this?
sorry, what do you mean the regular school? You mean like the out? You mean public school
Yeah,
or?
yeah,
Oh,
because
so you
yeah,
mean they
because
heard about the Muslims that they would worship only and make sujood only to Allah, and then
yeah,
in the night
absolutely.
school they heard that you have to make sujood to the Imam.
Yeah, and not only did we study that, did we used to actually practice that in the main Jamaat Khana. The pictures of Aga Khan used to be across all the four walls of the Jamaat Khana, right? Recently, what they did, not very recently, it's been like 7, 8 years, that they've removed those pictures from the front of the Jamaat Khana and they've moved it to the sides because they did get a lot of questions and objections. Not that anybody else saw it, they were getting questions from within the Somali community that when we make sujood, it physically appears that we are making sujood to our imam, which shouldn't be, right? There are some purists,
Yeah,
you know
and
within
just I think
Ismailis who are.
right, right, and I think just for the audience, the reason why he mentioned that from within the Agakhani community is because
Mm,
outside people are not allowed inside the Jamaat Khana, right? Like you can't enter if you're not an
absolutely,
Ismaili.
yeah. You
Yeah.
can't. Even if you go to the Smiley Center in Toronto, for example, they would give you a tour outside of the prayer hours, right? But and the Agakhan Museum and so forth, but they wouldn't let you inside the prayer hall during prayer time.
So I'm curious though, like how do they determine? Like, do you guys have membership cards? Like, how do they know who's an Agakhani and who's not?
Um, so see, usually a Smiley would go to one Jamaat Khana, right? He wouldn't shuffle across like we do in Masajid. Like Smiley would never, shuffle across Jamaat Khanas like we do in Masajid. So it's just by virtue of being there daily that people know
So it's like
you and they
so
know
it's like
your.
close knit. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, it would be
yeah,
close,
yeah.
but I have a. I mean, I'm just curious here because,
Mhm.
like, what if I just said, I relocated from I don't know. Let's say I was in Toronto. I came from I don't know Alberta. I'm like, hey, I'm
Yeah,
new here. You know what I mean? Like, how would they know? Like, is there
I'll
some
tell
kind of
you.
membership process? Like,
I'll tell you, I'll tell you. So first of all, they would expect you to be with somebody or accompanied by somebody who's a regular in that Jamaat Khana. That's A, right? Um, B, now they do have registration system for the because of the COVID and everything. So yes, they do have a registration system now. But without COVID, for example, I've seen in my early days, childhood, that one of the at the gates, Ismailis do have these volunteers and scouts, and one of them told me to just scout a person and see if he's. I mean, he said that, Akbar, he looks like he's not a regular, or I don't know if he's an outsider, quote unquote. So can you keep an eye on him, right? And they would say this to a couple of people, and they would essentially have somebody keep an eye on such people. And if you're somebody from outside, that they, depending on which country you are in, right? If you are in a place like India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, they would probably kick you out, like, and beat you up a little bit. Or if you're in a more civilized place, they would probably ask you to leave, right? So yeah, I mean, they can get rough, so it's no surprise. They are the assassins after all, right?
Interesting. I mean, but coming back to an original point that you made earlier on, it kind of sparked my interest. You said your parents were there every day at 3 a.m. in the morning. What were they doing at 3 a.m.? Like, what would you do at 3 a.m. in the morning in
Essentially,
Jamaat Khana?
yeah, what Akhan would do is that, so there's a strict hierarchy level in the Jamaat Khana, pretty much close to what I would say is in the Hindus, the Brahmins and the so forth, right? So in a Ismaili community, you have memberships in masajid, or sorry, majalis, right? And in those majalis, depending on the level of membership, you get promoted to ranks. And how those ranks kind of manifest themselves is that Aga Khan would give you a Isme Adam to recite, right? And in the morning, from essentially from 3 to 5, and strictly from 4 to 5 a.m. in the morning, you would, I mean, they would switch the lights off, right? uh, I mean, akin to like some Sufi circles and some dhikr circles, which other people do as well. They would just sit and recite that Ithme Azam, even though, and that Isme Azam is supposed to be a secret one, so you're not supposed to tell it to anybody, because if you, I mean, there are fake laws and within the Smiley community that if you speak about your Isme Azam, you'll get cursed or something else. But essentially, it's a silent zikr from essentially between 3 to 5 in the morning, and then around 5:20 a.m. they have their morning prayer. So essentially, it's no activity. It's just silent, lights out dhikr, which they recite. The most common Isme Azam is Al Aliyu. That's what normal smileys get. Everybody thinks it's unique to them, but essentially that's the most common one. Recently, they've started giving out other names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just to, diversify the Isma Azam. But essentially that's what happens more in the mornings in Jamaat Khana.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I was just curious because I mean, 3 a.m. To do things, it seems a little bit early, but I mean, very interesting nonetheless. But so moving along in terms of like the Agakhani process here. So apparently only certain members are involved or have a hierarchy. There's also a outside, there's a closure to the outside world, and most of you guys are kept like within this cult like bubble for the most part, right? Like you only have Agakhani friends and classmates and teachers, and so I guess the biggest thing is you mentioned that I think one of the forms of the indoctrination is something important that you mentioned about the Agakhani history, in which they teach in their own way. I'm going to assume that they paint the narrative that the Agakhanis were like almost like in victimhood, meaning that we're continually oppressed and we've been, this is our history, and going back to the Imams, we've always been killed or beaten or killed or whatever it may be, and then maybe like bringing that guilt and then possibly going on to this fabricated history about these unknown imams, or is that similar to what happens over there?
Yeah, essentially what happens from, I would say, grade 1 to grade 10 is that you would study short periods of Ismaili Imamate history, and then grade 11 and 12 you'd study them in detail, right? And essentially the picture they paint is that yeah, you're right, Mort. It's part of the indoctrination that, it's to the very core of the Ismaili belief is a principle that we Ismailis, as they say, right, have an uninterrupted, an unbroken chain of imama from the time of Ali radiallahu an to the present Imam Karim Aga Khan. That's their claim. So all of the gaps between these two personalities is essentially has to be filled, right? And they do fill it. So they do have the Fatimi period, right, where they did have the Ismaili or the Fatimi Khilafa, right? And then they had the split with the Bohra. But and then after that time, in normal history books, you would find that there's no mention of any Ismaili history or no presence, right? And suddenly, out of the blue, and Aga Khan the first and Aga Khan the second, they used to function as peers, Ethna peers, rather than any imams. And then came the claim of being imam, right? And being from the Fatimid lineage of imams, because there were Ismailis in Syria as well, Arabic speaking Ismailis, genuine Ismailis who had descended from, who were the remnants of the Fatimid rule, right? So they had their present day generations, and they were all surprised as to, like, where did the Imam come from? Like, there was no Imam for the past 400 or 500 years, and so there's this guy in India who works pretty closely with the British, and all the Khans have done that, well, for the first, second, and third, and he's claiming to be an Imam. So at that time, those Ismailis, they did have some Shari practices such as fasting, praying, wearing the veil, hijab, right? Those are all abolished by Aga Khan, especially Aga Khan the third, right? Because he didn't want any of those practices to stay alive within the community, because he wanted his community to be quote unquote progressive, and progressive means leaving the Islamic law behind, right? So essentially,
Right.
yeah, the study, the history which they teach is essentially very, very, I would say, rosy picture of what the Ismaili history is. They would not mention about for example, Hakim bi Amrullah, right? I think it's a 16th Ismaili Imam. He was the one who you would read in, for example, what's that book, the Tarikh Fatmin in Misr, right? The author writes that, and it's from several historical sources, that he would ask his citizens to make sujood to him, right?
Yeah.
So this was Hakim bi Amrullah. There was also Imam Mustansir Billah. That's the time where a lot of the Ismaili theology about, the end of times, the Mahdi, and the Imam being the Mahdi, and so forth, came to light through the Duat, the Ismaili Duat, Nasir Khusro and Hassan Sabah, right? And they were promulgating the Nizari Ismaili mission in Badakhshan and in Persia. All of this is kept. They wouldn't go any details, right? And also the split between Ismaili and Mustali, which was the time of 19th Imam Nizar. They would just skim over it, but essentially their purpose is to teach the Ismaili kids that we have an uninterrupted chain. Even though one of their Imams, he himself said that I'm not the biological son of the previous Imam, I'm his spiritual son. And it's this is in Smiley sources as well as non-Smiley sources. But if I've, over the past 10 years, whichever Smiley I've said this to, he or she wouldn't believe me until I would show them these sources. So that's what this in their mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic because I mean, I wouldn't say all of them, but there is in some ways some bloody history with the Ismailis. Like, it's not just some kind of progressive esoteric movement. There have been groups like the Qaramita. There have been groups like that have been around, and the Hashashin, right? I think there have been people who have been quite militant among the Ismailis, or I guess you could say from their group and lineage at some point. But one thing that I would say is very interesting is something that you mentioned earlier about the relationship, which I think the viewers would find fascinating, between like the latter imams or the Agakhans as they came known to be. I'm sorry, and their relationship with the British. It's interesting because from what I understand, and you can keep me honest here, is that after they in I think it's Kermanshah where they lost. They tried to take over the little area after they were gifted it, and he lost the. He was crushed by the ruler of Iran. He fled to Afghanistan, and at that point, I think they became mercenaries for the British government at that time. Um,
Exactly.
and and then from that point, after the British were terribly defeated in Afghanistan, they ended up shifting them to India, which is where
Yeah.
this whole new kind of branch, I guess what I would say the Hinduization portion of it came because they tried to appeal to the Hindus that were there, and then that
Mm.
kind of is a reflection of what we maybe see among the Khoja Agakhanis today. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is a lot of. So yes, Akhan the first did used to. He was a mercenary for the British, as you said. One interesting thing about the Hashishin, which I would like to add, is that they are. This is actually taught in Ismaili history, and they are painted with a very heroic, I would say, brush. And it's taught that the Ismaili, those are the Fidayin, right? Fidai means, the one who would do anything for his imam and would even like commit suicide. If the imam would say, jump from the top of this building, he or she would do that. And even today, interestingly, most Malis don't know this. They have a majlis, which is a gathering after the Jamaat Khana hours, right? They have a majlis called Fidai Majlis. And that Fidai Majlis, it actually pays tribute to the assassins, right? And what they did, because, we all know that they were the ones who killed Nizam ul Mulk, and several other figures, including Salahuddin, were targeted by them. So they actually, most Malis, like I said, don't know this, but the Fidai Majlis does refer to the assassins, even though there have been several attempts to say that, oh, all of these are, folklores, and there's no such thing as, the stories about the assassins, that they would create a fake heaven and they would drug their mercenaries and drug them into doing, unimaginable things. But that's their history. Sorry, but the real point was something else. What were you talking about?
The relationship
The
between the
British.
British
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
government. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, if you read the book by Harry Greenwald, and I have it on my website on Rethinking Smallism, it does speak about not only the relationship, but the monthly stipends, which not only Akhan the third, but Akhan first, second, and third, all of them have had from the British, and also Mihir Bose, a very famous researcher. I mean, he used to focus on sports personalities and still does, but one of his interests was investigating the Aga Khan. And so in his book, The Aga Khans, which I again have on the website, you would see letters which are exchanged between the British and the Aga Khan, and Aga Khan would say, I will do such and such things for you in Afghanistan and Kirman and so forth, and in return, just give me such and such stipend, right, or just pay for my services. So essentially, that used to be the trend of all the Aga Khans, and even today, you would see that Karim Aga Khan, even though he's recently moved his headquarters from France to Portugal, he still maintains very, very close ties with the British monarchy. You would see him with the Queen and the royal family very commonly, and also, which kind of dovetails into his influence over a lot of projects which happen in the developing world, because that's where he gets a lot of his projects from through the UN, and working on the heritage sites and so forth through one of his companies called the Akhan Trust for Culture. So yeah, I mean, strong ties with the British, and the sudden claim of imama also came. What I say is that this wasn't something which was masterminded just by the Aga Khan. This was masterminded, yes, but it was with the help of the British, and those are the same people who brought up personalities like Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani. And that all of these efforts are just a part of the divide and conquer strategy. And so I would say Ismailism in terms of Al-Khan claiming his imama, and Qadianism in terms of Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani proclaiming his prophethood, or I would say two big wedges which they threw into the Muslim Ummah, so which still prevail, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting, or the viewers might find interesting, is that both of these groups happen to spring out of the Indian subcontinent.
Mm.
And ironically, it came out during a time where the British were trying to find a way to undermine the Ottoman Empire. They were trying to finally bring it down to its knees. And the age old idea of divide and conquer seemed to be at play here, because it's interesting to note that both of these groups, the Agakhani Ismailis and the Ahmadis or Qadianis, they both encouraged the Muslim majority populations in the area to not revolt against the British rule and to actually disavow from the Ottoman Empire. As a matter of fact, I believe you can talk about this a little bit more, but I believe the third Aga Khan was originally appointed one of the leaders of the All Indian Muslim League, and then because of this issue of not trying to of undermining the Ottomans, it caused a rift between him and the Sunni Muslim population in India at that time.
Yeah, absolutely, Mort. But Akhan saw himself as a contemporary to the likes of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, may Allah have His mercy on him immensely. So he used to believe that Sunnis have their Khalifa, a Caliph, and the Shia, as Ismailis want to always like to project themselves as the second largest. Um, Group within the Shia community, he would say, I'm the Imam of the Shia and he's the Imam of the Sunnis, right? And Harry Greenwell's book, it actually does shed light upon some interactions which Aga Khan had with Sultan Abdul Hamid, or I think it was Sultan, no, it was Sultan Abdul Hamid, because he was there till 1909, as I would recall. So yeah, there were interactions between Aga Khan, and he did speak to Sultan Abdul Hamid, rahimahullah, the second, on a few issues, and he was essentially the spokesperson for the British, right? So yeah, I mean, there was this role, and that's how he saw himself.
So talk about a little bit about like why that period was important for the Aga Khan to be close to the British, because I think some people may not realize the benefit that he received, because I know that obviously, I mean, it's pretty easy to understand why, if someone wanted power, to cozy up with the British, but it doesn't. It seems to me there were points in that relationship in which the Aga Khan, even at some point himself, felt like that it wasn't reciprocated, meaning that I think there were times where the Aga Khan wanted help in particular areas in different throughout the Commonwealth, and I think at some point Britain decided to say, well, you know what, we're not really going to get involved with this, and the Aga Khan felt like there was a slap in his face because of that. So what was the significance of this relationship?
I would say it was huge. It was huge. I mean, there are few court cases which Khan fought under the auspices of the British Empire in Bombay High Court, which were ruled in his favor, and they were, I would say, instrumental. Uh, I think that's kind of underplaying it, but instrumental is a small term. But they were huge, I would say, in determining the authority of Aga Khan over his Jamaat, right? First was the Aga case, very famously called Aga case, and in that case, um, Aga Khan presented, and this is Aga Khan presenting it, and it's in the Bombay High Court website papers. You can download it. Any Smiley can go and verify that. So in that, Aga Khan claimed that he was the rightful Imam of this community, and whatever assets this community had, right, were actually his assets. Essentially, what happened in that time was that the Ismaili community, or I would say it was actually a Khoja community, right? Because this case is also called the Khoja case or Akhan case. So essentially, the Khoja community was a group of, not religiously, diverse people, but they were ethnically, they were Khojas because they come from the same, I would say, ethnic background, and they had two strands amongst themselves. So they had a few people who were following the Sunni school of thought and few people who were following the Shi'i school of thought, right? Within the same Khoja community. Now, Aga Khan came and he tried to exert control over the entire Khoja community in terms of their assets, in terms of the tributes which were paid, right? And he said, "I'm the rightful recipient of these tributes," which they still do till this day. These tributes, and this case was fought in the Bombay High Court, and in that very case, Aga Khan presented that Ali radiallahu an, as I said, is the 10th avatar of the Hindu Lord Vishnu, and that he is the present day um, manifestation, as they call it these days, manifestation of Ali radiallahu an. So that's a very blasphemous claim, I know. I mean, quite shocking for people who haven't heard of this before.
Yeah.
But essentially, when this claim was made, Akhan also wanted control over all of the Khoja community assets. And the Bombay High Court Justice Arnold, still know his name, obviously detailed article available on my website, but he ruled in Akhan's favor. And as a result of that, all the assets of the Khoja community, even though the people who were with the Aga Khan, right, who were following the Shi'i school of thought, were a very, very small minority. But the decision was made against the Sunni Khoja majority people. And there were obviously lots of riots and this and that. There's a Barabai incident in which 12 brothers were, they had riots and so forth. But this was, I would say, instrumental in cementing Aga Khan's role as the owner of all the Ismaili community assets, and also cementing his position as a leader of the Khoja community in that case.
So just going back though, so what tributes were the Sunnis paying though? I mean, what? I mean, was it taking over of land? Like, what assets did he take from the Sunnis that were there?
So if you essentially go to Ismaili Jamaat Khana today, right, and all of these Jamaat Khanas, from Toronto to Vancouver to Bombay to Karachi to Australia, they are a property of Aga Khan himself, right? And this happened after the Aga Khan case because all Jamaat Khanas became Aga Khan's property. What happened before that was that these centers or these Jamaat Khanas or these, they were essentially community centers, right? That's what they were at that time. They were property of the trust, right? They were property of the trust. And just like we have masajid, for example, in the Western world, there's a board of trustees, and there's a chairman of the board and so forth. But Akhan essentially won all the assets for himself. So that's a difference which it made, having the assets in the name of the community or the trust versus having these assets in the name of the Aga Khan himself.
Yeah, so I mean, I would assume that that would affect the Shiite community, right? But how did that? I mean, was he able to take anything from the Sunnis because of that, like a Sunni
Yeah,
Khoja?
the control of the entire, I would say, these community centers was with the Sunnis, and which they lost due to this. And this is an
Oh, okay.
area, yeah, this is the area where I would say, because anybody who reads the case today, you can refer to Tina Prohit's book, The Al-Khan Case, and she elaborates it very beautifully. I also have it on my website, the entire book as well. So if you read that book, you will see that nobody was expecting Al Khan to win this case because his case was pretty weak. He had very, very small support from within the community because it was only a small faction which were supporting him. Essentially, the 80-90% of the community was against him, right? And he had no chance of winning that case, but he did win that case. A similar thing happened. Another court case happened for so what happened was that Aga Khan, he excommunicated the Aga Khan the third, now this one, because this was a second case. This was fought in 1906 or 1908. This was called the Haji Bibi case. That case was also ruled in Aga Khan's favor, and this was essentially Khan, Khan the third, same Khan which you mentioned of for the Muslim League and who had a role in the Muslim League, he had excommunicated his um, cousins from all of the inheritance which his father, grandfather, and father had left behind, right? And essentially, that was also a case where Khan said that this should be ruled according to the Hindu custom rather than the Islamic custom. And ironically, the court ruled in his favor and said, okay, I mean, the inheritance should be divided on the base of the Hindu custom. And that's why I always say that Ismailism is more closely related to Hinduism rather than Islam. I mean, saying things like das autar and all of these claims
Mm.
are, especially many practices as well in the Ismaili community, the ginans, the bhajans, the hymns which they sing are reminiscent of what the Hindus do.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we spoke about the Aga Khan himself, I mean, it's just even this modern day Aga Khan, it's just appalling that people can believe that this man is someone they should direct acts of worship and prayer to,
Mm,
and give money to. I mean, this is a guy that's worth billions of dollars, and the funny part is the money is not an issue. I mean, people can be wealthy. Allah gives wealth, but the fact that to think that he is Masum and like he's riding around, on a jet ski with the aura uncovered, and he has like women in bikini around him, and there's booze around it, right? Like things like this, like that you would think a Masum person would never
mm,
be around. Like especially if you were to read accurate history of the imams or even the alleged imams they're claiming to follow or be in tradition of, it would seem mind-boggling that someone would be able to accept a man like that to be infallible and to be one worthy of prayer and worship and even spiritual guidance. And I think that's a big issue. And maybe you can talk about that because I think this might highlight something that some of the listeners don't know, which is the idea of the minor qiyamah and the major qiyamah, and it's that role in terms of how he behaves and what he allows and what's halal and haram. Maybe you can kind of now would be maybe a good time to talk about that.
yeah, essentially, and it's actually the reason behind a lot of Smileys thinking that whatever their Imam does, whether it's going around on a jet ski with his aura uncovered, as you said, whether it's running the largest private bank in Pakistan called the Habib Bank, and also the Diamond Trust Bank in I think it's in Africa, somewhere Uganda or I think Kenya, and running insurance companies, whatever it is, right? At the core of their belief of their is the principle that Sharia has been abrogated, right? This was done by their 23rd Imam. His name was Hassan the second, but the Ismailis referred to him as Imam Allah Zikri Salam, which means upon his mention be peace. But Hassan the second, what he did, he was essentially the fourth, and in history books he's referred to as the fourth Lord of Al-Maut. So he is the one who abolished Sharia in his famous proclamation. This was called the Day of Resurrection, or the Yom al Qiyamah, right, which absolved Ismailis of, as he said, all the burden of the rules of Sharia, right? And this was done in Ramadan during a fast, right? He called upon all of his followers, gave them a sermon and said that, and at that time, Hassan the second, he was not the Imam at that time. He was speaking on behalf of the Imam, right? Who was the 22nd Imam. So Hassan said that, me, Hassan, I'm speaking on behalf of Imam Qahir, who was the 22nd Imam, and then he proclaimed that the burden of Sharia has been lifted from you, and he made everybody break their fast. And it's written in history books that there was booze, there was even every haram in terms of food
This is at a
was there.
party.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they had a party in which they broke their fast. And and yeah, this is the core of their belief. So essentially what they would say is that, the Sharia, anything, and Sharia, we know it's not the Islamic criminal code, right? Sharia means Islam, right? Anything in Islam is Sharia. So if somebody says more that Sharia is abolished, essentially that person is saying, I don't abide by anything which is in the scriptures, right? So that's where this comes from.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem because, for us, the Sharia, the principles of it come from the Quran. So if you say I don't believe the Sharia is applicable today, or it's any use, that means you believe the Quran is not of use to you, right? I mean, this is what you're essentially saying because, there are ayat which talk about rulings and what's permissible, what is impermissible, and so if you are willing to just dismiss that, then obviously that throws into question your faith. But it's funny because I believe some of them will defend this by saying that, well, the only reason why there's a qiyamah Stughra is because of the persecution of the Agakhanis and the Ismailis. And so, in order to survive, in order to thrive, and we don't have a leadership now, whatever excuse they give, the Imam will temporarily suspend aspects. Like they'll use very clever terminology, right? Like we will suspend certain aspects of the Sharia, and then they'll go on and make the theological case or the jurisprudential case that, oh well, for example, if you're starving in the desert, you can eat pork, or for example, Umar, he canceled the punishment for stealing
The
during
criminal
the
code, yeah.
right, exactly. So how do you respond to something like this? How do you when you deal with them, like when you, like, let's say you were to bring this up to an Ismaili today, and you say, well, what do you think about this, and he responds with this. What's something that you would typically respond to that as a response?
Typical response to this is that the Imam is the Shari. Oh, sorry, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only Shari, right? Imam is the, if any, is the representative of the Shari, right? And he would just implement his rules. And even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam, he wasn't allowed to change any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rules and any of um, his um, his guidelines, right? On top of that, what Hassan ala dhikr salam, or Hassan the second, did was he was actually, Ismailis were in power at that time, even though they were fighting with the Sunni Khilafah. They were in power at that time as far as Al Mawt was concerned and the Fatimid Empire was concerned. So this change wasn't made in a time where it was a necessity of any sort. This change was made inspired by the teachings of Hassan Sabah, uh, who was not the direct teacher, but Hassan the second. He was inspired, and by the way, he's called Hassan the second because Hassan Sabah was Hassan the first. So he was inspired by the teachings of Hassan Sabah, who claimed the Qiyamah, and also the Ismaili Duat at that time. Qadi Nu'man and Abu Yaqub Sajistani, they were all, back and forth during this time. They wrote and they propagated these ideas inspired by, the Neoplatonic philosophy about, the Ismaili theology, in which they would say that, there are seven doors or seven periods, and there is a natiq for each period, and there's a wasi for each period, and there are seven imams in each of these doors, right? And they would propagate these ideas to just I would say market the esoteric interpretation of the Quran and whatever, and validate essentially whatever their imams used to put out as their rules or farmans or their guidelines.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think that this is kind of, for those that are unfamiliar, this is the rise of Bataniya, like where you would basically this esoteric, and it's not just the esoteric understanding, but the fact that only a select few have access to this esoteric understanding of the Quran and Islam, and that everything else is simply just an illusion. It's just something that people are doing the wrong way, or perhaps by ritual, but there's really no meaning in that. And so essentially, this idea of being able to say, I can reinterpretate whatever it is, I know the true meaning. And even وَلِيَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ, even the Prophet himself did not convey the actual meanings for whatever reasons they say, but nonetheless to the general public, they would argue that the Prophet didn't convey true meanings of certain verses and things that he did, and certain realities of the world in the Quran. And obviously one can see, if you are a Sunni Muslim or even someone with common sense, how problematic this could be. When you have a group of men that decide that they alone understand the true meaning of certain verses and events, that leads door to suspicion, right? That, hey, you know what? Well, how do I know you're not just making up things for your own favor? And I think this is what the crust of the matter is, like the real meat of the issue is that what authority do they have to speak on these issues at the end of the day?
Yeah, exactly. And what Smiley theology implies is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as you said, he did not give out the true message. And essentially, what he was doing was just because he was practicing Islam in the physical sense, he wasn't practicing Islam in the same esoteric sense which the Ismailis claim, right? So, are you claiming? I would say to Ismail that, are you claiming that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't understand the esoteric meaning? Ali radiallahu anhu, up till Imam Jafar Sadiq, and whosoever imams, the Ismailis would believe in. All of these imams would practice prayer and fasting and Hajj and Zakat and everything, right? And up to a point where one imam comes and he says that, all right, the Sharia is abrogated. But interestingly, what happened was that another Ismaili imam, he actually became a Muslim, subhanallah. And, that's also obviously omitted from the Ismaili history books. Imam Jalaluddin Hassan, he was just the third Imam after Hassan II, who abolished the Sharia. Um, so he converted to Sunni Islam. He repudiated the faith and policies associated with the earlier lords of Al-Maut, and he cursed his ancestors, especially Hassan II, right? And he burnt his books. So this is written in one of the books which I can refer. I think it's called Ethics in Persian Poetry. This is from that book, and it gives a detailed account of what Jalaluddin Hassan did, right? Um, so um, so he also invited Muslim theologians from Iraq and Khorasan, and he was actually so Ismailis did, obviously, some of them did also convert to Islam at that time, and some of them, they revolted against the Imam and so forth. But the next Imam was again, after a few Imams, this was again kind of institutionalized that the Sharia is abrogated. So it's still practiced today. I mean, that's how the Ismailis remain till today.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point because, like I said earlier, they argue that it was out of desperation and survival that they had this qiyamah invention. But if we truly look at the history of Alamut, we see that it was in fact not even the Sunnis that were a threat to them. It was the Mongols, and the Mongols were the one that actually ended up destroying them. It wasn't even the Sunnis that came and did that. It was actually a completely foreign element that came and finally brought us down to its knees. And I believe that was what led to that 500 or 600 year gap until the AGAKHAN the first came out, right? I think that was the gap there.
That's exactly it is. So that's exactly how it is. The Mongols, they brought down the Fatimid Empire, and then 600 years later, Khan comes up and says, "Hey, I'm from the same lineage. I carry the same blood in my veins," which was a surprise to many, unsurprisingly, right?
Yeah. So what would you say? Because I mean, people might think, well, maybe they are the actual descendants of the imams or from the lineage of the Prophet or Fatimiyya. What do you know about the history of these individuals? Do they have a consistent chain that they can trace back all the way to the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because if you ask anyone, even Arab, anyone whoever belongs to a tribe, like I can put my nasab down. I can tell you exactly who my ancestors are. I can put it down in the shajara tree, right? Is this something that they have available to them? Can they actually prove this claim that they make, that they are actually descendants?
So in their prayers, the Ismailis, they actually take the names of all of these 49 imams, right? From Ali radiallahu an to Imam Hussein, Imam Zain al-Abidin, Imam Muhammad Baqir, Imam Jafar Sadiq, and so forth, till the present day Aga Khan. So essentially, in their minds, this is an unbroken chain, right? But if you look at the history books, even if you look at the Ismaili sources, the biggest disconnect comes where Hassan the second, he himself says, I'm not the biological son of the previous Imam, Imam Qahir. I am his spiritual son. Right. And then he goes on to claim Imama, that since I am the spiritual son, I'm no longer a spokesperson for him. In the same sermon in which he abolished the Sharia, he claims Imama for himself. So that's the biggest disconnect which has come in the chain. Also, Imam, I mean, one of the big, I would say, events in Imam Jafar Sadiq radiallahu an's lifetime was the fact that his son Ismail passed away, right, at a very young age, and he passed away 5 years before Imam Jafar Sadiq died, right? So if a son is dead 5 years before his father, how is he the Imam? And that's, mind you, that's the Imam um, whose name Ismailis used to describe themselves, Imam Ismail's Ismailis, right? And even he died 5 years before his father, and then they even skipped that and ignored that, even though, like I said, it's in Shia sources, it's in Sunni sources, it's in Western academia. Everybody knows these facts, but there are several disconnects within the Ismaili chain of imamat, and there are a lot of details on this which are there on the website if anybody would like to look up, but there are several disconnects.
Yeah, so I think what we can establish from this is that there is no direct lineage that goes back to, and it's probably in fact like the Aga Khan himself or his lineage directly is not from even an Arab ancestry. It's probably something more of a Persian or Turkic ancestry. Would
It
that be
is.
fair to say?
It is. He comes from Persian ancestry. That's 100%, because the history you find in any Smiley would find would be till Khan the first, right, and that would go to Iran and then Afghanistan and then moving to Bombay, and from there
Right.
he moved to France and then Portugal, right? That's the, as they call, the seat of the Ismaili Imamate. But essentially that's the only history which is known. Nobody can prove any Arab lineage, and plus all the Aga Khans, they've been marrying into Westerners. So they're the last one, I would say, Ali Muhammad Aga Khan, who's the youngest son of Aga Khan. He's 75%, I would say, Caucasian. So he's a mix of German slash whatsoever, and only 25% he is, or 20% is Asian
Right.
or
Yeah.
Persian. Yeah,
Yeah. No. It's interesting because when you look at them, like, man, these are like Anglo. You think of Anglo people, like when you look at the family of the Aga Khan, right? You're like, oh my god, what happened here? But I mean, not that it's a problem, but it's just that it just doesn't seem to fit in line with what they claim about their ancestry. But I mean, that could be argued in the case, whatever they want to say. I mean, as far as their offspring, they're free to marry who they want to marry. But I think that the meat of the issue is that the original Aga Khan who was given this title, the first, I don't believe there's any solid evidence to suggest that he comes from any single Arab lineage, or even furthermore, even from the Husseini or Fatimiyya lineage. I don't think there's any solid proof or that could be given to support that. And I think that was something that they don't like discussing too much, because a lot of this idea of imama, it depends on this. If they don't have this unbroken chain, it's just a culmination of a bunch of crazy people that wanted power to just make up rules. I mean, if there's no unbroken chain, because the whole idea of this unbroken chain is what solidifies this sort of divine command and divine authority. Once that is broken, then there is really no divine authority. There is no divine command anymore. I
Absolutely,
think,
and that's the
yeah.
case. And you're right, Ismailis don't want to discuss this at length. They would usually discredit any evidence you throw at them in this regard, even though, like I said, this evidence comes in their own history books. And for example, if you read the book The Ismailis by Farhad Daftari, and that's published by the Institute of Ismaili Studies. Even in that book, this piece about Imam Hassan, or Imam Allah Zikr Salam, as Ismailis would call him, his claim that I'm not the biological son of the previous Imam is documented, but they would just, skim over it, discredit it, or use any excuse to just ignore it.
So let me ask you this now, moving along, just kind of shifting gears a little bit. What is their understanding of the Quran? Like, for us as Muslims,
Mm.
Orthodox Muslims, the Quran is of the center of what we use to determine right and wrong, good and bad, our salvation, our practices, our instructions, our guide. The Quran mentions it's not only a furqan, a criterion, but it's a guide, it's huda, it's also shifa, it's healing for us. The Quran it's kalamullah. It is literally the word of Allah for us.
Mm.
And obviously one cannot be a Muslim from orthodox positions if you don't accept the perfectness of the Quran and the preservation of the Quran and its divine nature, right? And now, how does this translate over to the Ismaili beliefs? Do they have a similar understanding, or is it something entirely different from what traditional Orthodox Muslims would believe in?
It's entirely different, Mort. It's so different that any Muslim would be really really surprised as to what the Ismaili belief is. So if you listen to or if you listen to this, there's a Howard educated Ismaili missionary, and what he essentially does, he puts out the thoughts which were inked by Abu Yaqub Sijistani and Qadi Noman and the likes. They would argue that wherever uh, Quran is mentioned, right, or Kitab Mubin is mentioned, right, they would equate the word Kitab Mubin to Imam Mubin, and they would say that Imam Mubin is Agakhan. So if you look up these appearances in the Quran about Kitab Mubin and Imam Mubin, they would say that this refers to the Imam. So for example, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we've documented everything in a clear register, and Allah will refer to Lawh al-Mahfuz in that verse, which is the, I think, 12th ayah of Surah Yasin. Um, Ismailis would say that, oh, everything is manifested in the Imam, right? In the present day Imam, which is the Agha. So whatever Agha says is the Quran. It's not the Quran which the literalists, and that's what they call the Sunnis. What the literalists say, it's the Quran which we only know, as they would say it, right?
Very
For them,
interesting.
yeah, it's. I mean, can you believe that somebody would not believe in the Quran and still claim to be a Muslim? And Ismailis don't even. I mean, when I was Ismaili, Mort, I'd never had a Quran in my home. Most Ismailis, stone Ismailis, they don't have a Quran in their home, right? And this was not just in my house, in our entire family, which was like 7 8 families at least, and 15 20 families in the extended family. None of us had a Quran in our house because we didn't follow the Quran. The Quran to us was a historical record of whatever events happened 1400 years ago. It had nothing to do with the present day. All the commandments in the Quran, including the forbidding of riba and hijab and wudu verses and Surah Amaida. Everything was not applicable because the Imam, we used to believe and the Ismailis believe even today, is that the Imam is the Shari' and he has the authority to change the Sharia, and he's the word of Allah, right? Because if you look at if you read Abu Yaqub Sajistani, right, he describes four well springs, right, and he says the first is the intellect, right, which is the universal reason or the mind. He says the second is the soul. The third, he says, is the natiq, or the prophet, right? And he says the fourth is the founder of the interpretation, and who's the point of contact for the mortals, and he is the imam. So for them, imam is the one uh, who relates to the soul or the universal intellect, or universal soul or the universal intellect. Both of them are separate, obviously, and that's the terminology which he implies. He says, for example, he would say imam, or the founder of interpretation. He would say he's responsible for ta'wil, right? And the prophet is responsible for the talif, which is, talif means writing down something, right? At the higher level, this universal soul is responsible for tarkib. Tarkib means, designing or putting together or strategizing, right? And the universal intellect, they would say, is responsible for the ta'id, right now, which is giving his, I would say, permission, or ta'id means permitting something, right? And by virtue of allocating this, I would say, authority to the Imam of Tawil, you would find very, very strange things in the Ismaili Tawil, including something which I recently read was his Tawil of, for example, wudu, right? And he would say, the the reason you wash your face is because the holes in your face, they refer to, for example, the holes in your ears, they refer to something, and very strange philosophies. And they would say, even Hajj has a tawil, right? And they would say the Imam is not only the Quran, but the Imam is the Kaaba as well. So looking at the Imam is na'udhu billah, it is actually Hajj. So Hajj for a Ismaili would be just looking at Agakhan. Can you
Is
believe
that
that?
why they always get excited when they have like the jubilees or whatever that is, like where they get to, oh, we're gonna see the imam, we're gonna see the aga khan or whatever, and they all get the
Yeah.
line up. And yeah, it's a
Yeah.
very strange thing. I remember seeing a video in Syria, and I'm wondering, like, I was just mind boggled because here these are people who speak Arabic, and
Mm.
they see this guy who can't speak a lick of Arabic, right? And he's, it's just very strange to me. Like, they have to, the imam who's an imam of Rasulullah is the one who can't even speak the language of the Quran, and you need a translator to speak to your imam. Like, it just is so mind boggling to me. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. Ismailis are so far away from Islam, and I can relate to that because I was a Ismaili, right? So, Ismailis are so far away from Islam that they sometimes, not sometimes, they usually find it difficult to see the huge gap between Islam and Ismailism, right? They have no idea what things are there in Islam. They know, obviously, they do scratch the surface, as they know, like the testimony of faith and the prayers, the Muslim Salah and Hajj and Zakat. They know that, right? but
Hmm.
but they don't, they are so far from the scripture, the Quran, that they wouldn't be able to see that, oh, so the Quran clearly says this, and what we do is absolutely, on the opposite side of the spectrum. So this thought, they're shielded from this from the very childhood, in terms of, like I told you, being socially isolated, living in a bubble. And that's a very definition of a cult, isn't it, Mort? I
Right.
mean, that's how a cult thrives and survives and expounds within itself. Ismailis do carry out dawah activities, but they carry it out carry these activities out in a very, very secretive manner. Usually focus on the within the northern areas of Pakistan, which I recently had a chance to go and speak to a few people. But that's where they not recently, actually, some time back. But that's essentially where they do focus their dawah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And just going back to the original point that you made, when you talk about, him being shot, like the one who is the source of the legislation.
Mm.
This is why we call Allah al-Hakim, because He is the legislator, and there can be. This is one of His names. There can be no legislator besides Him. He is the one who has the sole right to make things permissible and impermissible. And this is actually an ayah in the Quran. اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله. They have taken their lords, their monks and their rabbis to be lords besides Allah. And this is in terms of legislation, by making things haram and halal. And this is how they became kuffar. This is how they became, maghdubi alayhim waladdallin, right? Either cursed or misguided, right? And these are the things that they are encouraging others who, in the name of Islam, forget about, which is the very thing which it came to correct. They're using the same name to then encourage the behavior that Islam came to correct. And this is just the irony behind it. Like, one has to really appreciate the irony when you see, well, wow, they've really reinvented a religion and totally morphed it. It's a 180-degree change from what it essentially is. And I think people need to realize that. I think if I could give any advice listening to all of this right now to any Ismaili out there, if you are sincerely about finding the truth and wanting to know what is actually the reality, I would encourage you to unbiasedly just read the Quran. Don't even speak to anybody. Don't speak to any person, any imam, any sheikh. Read the Quran. Get a copy of the Quran in your language, with translation, if you can't read the Arabic language, and read the Quran and see how clear it is. You don't need someone. One of and I'm sorry, I don't mean to go on a tangent, but I'm just thinking about this. One of the key differences between us as a Muslim and other religions is we don't need middlemen. I don't need some priest, some pundit, some imam, anyone to be a middle path or a deal breaker between me and Allah. I can read His words directly, and it's clear. The Quran is revealed clearly for even the common man or the one who wants to ponder on the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's meant for everybody. And I would implore you guys to just literally, read a Quran. You can do it online. It's free. You don't have to pay anything for it. If you want to hide it, it's in a web browser. You don't have to worry about it, right? It's available to you. Just what excuse will you give to your Creator when you meet Him on the Day of Judgment, when you had everything available to you at the tip of your fingers, and yet you chose to believe something that even in your heart is ludicrous, that a man could have this much power, who's innocent, who's infallible. I'm sorry, and I mean, this is you have to appeal to the aql. As you know, it's funny because I always say that the Agakhanis love to talk about aql and the use of aql. Where is the use of aql when it comes to this? Right, this idea of it's eternal, like a co-eternal universe, and this created being as coexisting with Allah in your theology. Like, these things are just they're not adding up, and so I just wanted to get that advice out there to them, that just read the Quran. If you really have any doubts, I can guarantee the Quran will take away those doubts that you have.
May Allah bless you, Brother Mort. That's a very powerful message, alhamdulillah. And I would just echo what you said. The Quran is the guidance for Muslims. There wouldn't be any Islam without the Quran, right? So if a group is claiming to be Muslims, right, then go to the source which gives you the name of Muslim, right? It is the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us Muslims. And see for yourself, as you said, Mort, what are the differences between what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated and what the Imam, with due respect to him, has legislated. So it's a huge difference. I mean, uh, one of my, I would say, greatest moments in my journey to Islam came when I saw the Aga Khan, right? Because I mean, that was, I mean, I'd already, as I told you, I'd studied so much about Islam and madahibs and even like other religions other than Islam, that I was pretty much sure that what I'm doing is not the right way which the Creator has chosen for us, right? But when I saw the Aga Khan, that was the day when I really, really made up my mind to leave Ismailism. And that was because I had heard so many stories about Aga Khan being able to, how mesmerizing his looking into his eyes is, what an aura he has, what sort of charisma he has, and he would communicate to you. If you see him in person, he would communicate with you, and you would get all the answers which you have in your head. They will be somehow magically communicated to you. So I'd heard all of these, fake lores about the Ismaili Imam, and honestly, you know, I mean, I've seen some Westerners all of my life, and I just saw him as a Westerner among brown people who they were revering. Honestly, that's all I saw. I didn't feel anything. I didn't see anything, and that was, I would say, the final. I mean, that was a straw which probably,
So it was like an
saved the
epic
ocean.
failure. Like it was more like, so this is all it is. This is it. Like this is this is the guy.
Yeah.
Like,
Is this the moment? Is this the moment you all have been waiting for? So yeah, it was a
yeah. I
big
mean,
deal.
I could.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad that people would do that, but I mean, it's just funny to hear that. Like, I just feel bad because it's like this build up. Your whole life, you've probably been told this is the man that's going to save you from everything, your salvation, the man that's going to give you all the answers, who will remove doubts, who will cure you of any disease and cure your financial problems. And here it is. You see this obese beer drinker who's riding jet skis, and you see him, and it's like, okay, nothing happened. I feel worse about myself. This guy has all this money, and what do I do? He's not giving me any of it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, no, my my problem is not his physical appearance. Honestly, my what I always try to do is I try to speak about the beliefs, right? I try to keep it
yeah,
academic, right? Some people, they do choose to attack his appearance and physical properties, and then a smiley can come around, turn around, and say that, oh, Fala, mullah of yours, he's the same, right? He is bulky as well. So I would say, for smileys, it should be really academic, and that's how they should view it, and that's the direction we should take the conversation, because you know I mean, they would clearly see that there is academically speaking, there's no similarities, as I said, between Islam and Ismailism. It's so far apart that I said it before, that it's Ismailism is more closely related to Hinduism than Islam.
yeah. No, I would agree. And the only, and I definitely love the point about keeping academic. And the only reason why I mention these things is because about like I don't really care if he's bald or white or these things, but the idea of being the Sunnah practice, like being fit, being healthy, not
Mm.
drinking, like this is what brought upon his lifestyle, right? It's just the un-Islamic lifestyle is what brings upon ill health, or maybe what it might be. And that's why I feel like one can clearly see what he does with his free time, right? And I think that you can look at that and say, hey, is that Islamic? Is that prophetic? Is that divine? Is that
Mm.
infallibility, right? And you would say it can't be, right? When we look at the times of the Prophet where they wouldn't eat meat for a while, maybe once a week, maybe once in a month they would have meat, or they would the fact that if they had money, he never kept anything for himself. It was given in charity. He wouldn't, I mean, he, to the point where he didn't even leave inheritance for his daughters, right? I mean, these are things that, how much inheritance is the Aga Khan leaving for his family, right? You know what I mean? Like, and millions, I mean, maybe even billions, I don't know, right? And these are things that you would make someone think critically. Like, and just going to what you're mentioning is that the academic point is absolutely 100% correct. I think the first thing would be the Quran, and then just looking at the authentic seerah of the Prophet, seeing what even non-Muslims have written about the Prophet, and compare that personality with the personality of the Agakhans, and see how that even by Western academic standards, see how that lines up. It would be completely different, entirely different, right? And so I think that's one of the other element as well too.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, his abrogation of the entire Sharia, including his own practices. For example, I mean, for example, running these riba institutions, right? And how would you justify that? They're clearly against the Quran. So Ismailis would have a very, very, I would say, biased view against hadith, right? And they would say, oh, Quran only says do not pay interest, and only hadith says that do not receive interest. So, we are in line with the Quran. So, a lot of I would say confusion exists in the Smiley community as far as taking up hadith is concerned. They would always try to discredit hadith, even though they would happily pick up the hadith Saqlain or the Ghadir Khum hadith and use it to assert the authority of Ali radiallahu an. But even the Shia, the Ithna Sharia, right, or Zaydi, or whosoever the Shia are, right, they would find it very, very cringeworthy to buy into the idea that Karim Aga Khan is the present day reincarnation of Ali radiallahu an, and that Ali radiallahu anh was the, as I said, 10th reincarnation of the Hindu Lord Vishnu. And there were very twisted theology behind this, and even though they claim to be, as I told you, the second largest branch within Shia community, the Shia community, they really, really don't see eye to eye with Akhan, and even Shia and Sunni, both of them, they do object on the imama of Aga Khan and what he brings to the table.
Yeah, and I think so according to 12ism, like reincarnation isn't really that far off. But here's the biggest problem. I think people may not be making the connection, is that he's reincarnation of Ali, but in their minds, Ali radiallahu an is also Krishna or Vishnu, whatever, one of the Hindu gods. Essentially, what the Aga Khan is doing is he's deifying Ali and then saying he's a reincarnation of that deity, right? Essentially. And so he's making himself a god. This is in reality what's happening. Without saying he cannot say I am Allah, because that would sound very strange for people to hear, anyone who claims to be a Muslim. So the simpler way is to say, oh, Ali is that deity and I'm a reincarnation of Ali. So it kind of smooths the transition.
Yes. Do you see what's happening here, Mort? What's happening here is the marriage of two theologies into present day Ismailism. So one theology is the Hindu side of things, and this was obviously used in the Indian subcontinent to just sell the idea of the present day Imam is Aga Khan, right? And what they were waiting for is the 10th avatar of the Hindu Lord Vishnu, right? So they said, guys, here he is. He's the Aga Khan, right? So that's one school of thought, one theology. The second theology comes from what I said before, the universal soul and the universal intellect, and whatever Abu Yaqub Sijistani and his contemporaries have written. And essentially, present day Ismailism is a mixture of both of them. It's I mean, none of them is a true, or I would say an original Ismaili, right? They are just Agakhanis, as I would call them, right? And Ismailism is, as you said, it came to an end when the Mongols brought the Fatimid Caliphate down.
Yeah, so I just a question that I had in my mind. So maybe someone out there is wondering this. So we talked about some of these practices and some of the strange things and some of the clear tenets that are against Islam, and even about the character and the personality of this alleged Aga Khan, and then like this imam they have. But people on the surface level may look at the Aga Khan Foundation and see a bunch of charity work they do. Especially if you're from Pakistan, you'll see that there is like AGAKHAN Medical College, which is like supposed to be something that it's phenomenal, right? Apparently in that region, like people go to school there, they get treated in the hospital. Plus, I'm sure they have institutions in Africa all over, which nonprofits, which they allege, and apparently they're involved in community outreach, and they have mission statements all over. So are these in fact organizations and NGOs that actually do provide benefit and service, or are they just kind of a cover for other things? Because I do want to be fair. If they are providing services, I think it's important to say, hey, well, this was the wrong we mentioned, but actually, in fact, here they do have some good in it. You know what I mean? So what's your take on that?
I did a series on this called God's Money 2, right? God's Money originally was a documentary done by CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and this was God's money. So Aga Khan was the focal point of that documentary, and it was about the Ismaili money being smuggled between U.S. and Canada. It was caught at the Canadian border by the CBSA, and consequently the story came out, and it was a documentary on this. God's Money 2 was a series, essentially a web series done by myself along with a very special guest, Brother Ali. And he was actually quite elaborate in describing that how Aga Khan's, by virtue of being in those positions within these institutions, he was very elaborate on how these institutions act as a cover for money laundering from different places in the third world and channeling it to the Aga Khan, right, and his accounts. So very elaborate piece on that. It's available on the Rethinking Spasm YouTube channel. But to answer your question in short, these institutions, including Habib Bank, right? Habib Bank was recently shut down in New York over terrorist financing allegations, right? And these weren't just allegations, because otherwise it wouldn't have been closed down. But there were actually this was just a label for the money laundering practices and the lack of transparency which Habib Bank had, and a lot of internal Ismaili fund transfers globally, right? So Habib Bank is in Pakistan, but it has a global presence, and the global presence also helps Aga Khan channel his money from various parts of the world to where he wants that money. Similarly, to and speaking of Akhan Hospital, which is the medical institution which you spoke about, to its credit, it's JCI accredited. It's one of the probably two hospitals in Pakistan other than Shaukat Khanum who have a JCI certification. But Shaukat Khanum is completely free, in contrast with Akhan Hospital, which is hands down, the most expensive hospital in the country by far. It's and ironically it's built on land which is tax free. They don't have to pay property tax. It was supposed to be an institution which gives out free treatment and welfare to the patients, but what happens is that even Ismailis, they have a hard time getting a discounted treatment from the Akhan hospital. It's definitely not free. It's, like I said, it's one of the most expensive one. Even Akhan's other businesses. So all of Akhan's business empire, it comes under AKFED, or Akhan Fund for Economic Development, and within that, AKDN, the other institutions, Akhan Education Trust, and all of these functions, they're just trust in name, Mort. Essentially, what happens is that these organizations, for example, let's take up Akhan Trust for Culture, right? Very sweet name. It's a trust for culture, and so it's about preservation of the culture and restoration of the historic sites, UNESCO heritage sites. But actually what happens is that Akhan wins pretty heavy government contracts. And Akhan Trust for Culture is just a building and construction and restoration company through which Akhan, channels these government grants to his own, side of the account, right? So, and that's the case with all of these institutions. Even though Agakhan schools are there, I mean, they're not free schools by any mean. Same was the case with hospital. Agakhan also runs. He's recently started actually a farm, a pork farm actually. So he sells pork as well, right? And that was a piece which I had also exhibited on my website. Serena Hotels is another chain which he owns, and I mean, in Islamabad. Um, or recently, somebody told me that the finest wine in Islamabad, if you want to have it, go to the Serena Hotel. This was done by a
Oh.
blogger. Yeah, she was a Western blogger, and yeah, she was the one who said this on a vlog that the best wine in Islamabad is in Serena Hotel. So, and Ismailis would say, no, 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 Imam only owns like some percentage of this. This is not the case. IPS, which is Industrial Promotion Services, under which the Serena Hotels function, it's owned by Aga Khan. So yeah, Aga Khan has a huge business empire, Mort. I mean, he has a and it's very diverse, insurance companies, telecom companies, Roshni Telecom in Afghanistan, it's owned by the Aga Khan, right? You name it, right? Every
So it seems like that there's just elaborate money laundering scheme through channeling money through different businesses. Like it's just simply in the name of trust and funds, but it seems like they're moving money around for the benefit of the Aga Khan himself and for profit. I mean, it's just I know there were some cases just north of our border here in Canada where there were Ismaili community members that were caught smuggling money in between the borders. Millions of dollars were eventually, I think the Aga Khan had to surrender that and just give up on the case and lose millions there. Also, I remember reading about some proposed development center for cultural and heritage that they were going to do, and the Aga Khan won the bid or got it from the Canadian government for very little money or for nothing almost. And for I think almost a decade now, there's been no progress, and they've decided he like leases the property out to other tenants, and the government's now wondering, well, why do we give it to you for free, tax free, if you're making money off of it? Like it's just a very confusing thing that I always read about when it comes to his businesses.
Yeah, that was. I did an article on that. I think 3 or 4 years back on Rethink Ismailism. So yeah, what happened was this was a global center for pluralism, Mort.
Mm-hmm.
And Akhan, and the Canadian way is to promote pluralism and have inclusiveness and all of these fancy terms, right? And Akhan
Right.
actually said that I'll hold the flag and I'll build a global center for pluralism. He got some grant from the Canadian government and nothing happened for, as you said, for quite a few years. And then what happened was that in Ottawa there's a building for a very, very prestigious, I would say, prime site, which was formerly Canadian Royal Mint. So Aga Khan got that building on a 99-year lease from the Canadian government for $1. For $1, right? He made
Wow.
one office in that for the GCP, for the Global Center of Pluralism. All of the other offices, which were like 80-90% of the property, were rented out at market rates. Like, how ridiculous is that? Right. And for any
Yeah.
Somali not to see this, or any Muslim, or even a Canadian secular or Christian person to not see this as a daylight robbery and fraud is atrocious.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that this case is irrespective of religion. This is just by secular law. The man is robbing the people. I mean, he's a modern day thief, the corporate thief. And that's just how, there's no other way to describe that. But I do, I do want to kind of sort of wind down here a little bit. So I wanted to offer this last segment to you just to, give a chance to speak to Agakhanis that are listening and maybe thinking about, some doubtful areas in their faith and just maybe trying to reconsider or, just having a second thought. I want you to take this time to perhaps, make that make a case for them, in terms of, or advice to them. If you have something to share on the screen or anything you want to do, just let me know and we can do that too as well.
Sure. I mean, I do have a lot of information to share, but you know, I wanted to end this with um, some nasiha, right? Some advice to my Ismaili brothers and sisters who are watching this, who will watch this in the future or any point in their lives. By experience, I know more that every case is different. Every person who is contemplating leaving Ismailism for Islam has so many thoughts in his or her mind and questions. They are about, social support. They are about social rejection. And they are about family kind of distancing you from them. But to me, all of these issues are once you have the proper aqidah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never give you Jannah unless you are tested, and that goes in the very explicitly in the Quran as well. That did the believers think that they will be given Jannah without being tested, right? And so these challenges, these tests are part of the journey. There is no Ismaili who hasn't gone through a difficult time before coming to Islam, and even after coming to Islam, it does take a while to normalize relationships with any of your family members, right? Your family members, your parents might be Ismaili, your siblings might be Ismaili, but one thing which you as a Ismaili shouldn't do right now is ignore, because you have to die and you have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of the day. And you'd always talk about, as Mort said, about the universal intellect and using intellectualism and thinking, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Afala ta'qulun," right? What didn't you think? Like, didn't you ponder, right? And that's an invitation, not only an invitation from the Quran, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also a hujjah against you on Yawm al-Qiyamah if you don't use your brain, your intellect to just wrap your head around what's going on within Ismailism, right? What kind of a theology would remain, or what kind of a religion or deen would remain exclusive to a small group of people, to the extent that no Ismaili would even come out and speak openly about their beliefs. In Pakistan, Qadianis were excommunicated due to the fact that they openly spoke about their beliefs. Ismailis would never do that. And what's the reason for that? Well, I would invite them to think. I would invite them to reach out to me, if they have any questions, because I have so many Ismailis, or potential Muslim Ismailis, who reach out to me with, and that's where I say that in my experience all cases are different. Everybody has a different experience. The mileage varies from person to person, from country to country, to family. And I would implore each and every one of you to look into Islam, pick up a copy of the Quran, and see for yourself if it makes sense or not.
Yeah, Jazakumullah khair for that. I mean, we're going to be putting all the links to this stuff in the description as well too, to Rethinking Ismailism and all the other relevant links that we have here. Please do make sure to head over to their YouTube channel as well too, and show them support and subscribe to them, and check out the content as well to make sure that you guys do that, because it is important that we support each other in our da'wah, and that we encourage each other to make videos and content so that this can be reached. If you can like videos and share them, they have a higher chance to be viewed according to the algorithms. So be sure to check out their channel and to see the work that they're doing. And if you have any friends or family members or acquaintances that are Ismaili and they are maybe having some questions, please don't hesitate to refer them to the website, or to get in contact with Brother Akbar, and I'm sure they'll be able to help them in their journey, or with their questions in that regards. Also, with that being said, please make sure that you guys also like this video. And if you haven't subscribed already, I don't know why you haven't, but make sure that you guys do that as well if you're going to like the video, and consider donating to our work. If you felt that there was some benefit and you'd like to see more of these kinds of videos and you want to support the team, please be generous in your support, and Allah will reward you, inshallah. Any closing thoughts before we wrap this one up, Brother Akbar?
Yeah, I mean, one thing which I would include as a part of my message to our potential Muslim brothers from the Ismaili community is that uh, we are a huge jama'ah. I mean, don't think that you are probably the fifth person to leave Ismailism and come to Islam. We have a huge community. We have presence in over 15 cities in the world. We have representatives, and we can connect you uh, to our ex-Smiley community members who are very well aware of the social needs and the social experiences which you need and which you had as a Smiley. And trust me, you will not feel isolated once you take the leap of faith from Ismailism to Islam. We're there to support you, inshallah.
Perfect. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you guys in your efforts and accept from us and from you, inshallah. And we hope to speak to you soon. Anytime you have any updates or anything, please feel free to come back, and we'll be happy to host you guys, inshallah. It was a pleasure, and it's really an honor to have you. And may Allah accept all the good work that you guys are doing, and make it something that is a source of goodness for you on the day of Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of real Qiyamah, not the other kind of Qiyamah they talk about. Allahumma ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.